Before we begin this incredible story that's sure to touch your heart, I need to ask you something important. If you enjoy real, emotional stories, hit the like button below right now and subscribe to the channel, turning on notifications so you don't miss anything. That helps the channel grow and bring even more stories like this to you. Ready? Then let's begin. Richard Allen had everything anyone could dream of. A 3-story mansion in the most upscale neighborhood in the city, gardens that looked straight out of a magazine, an Olympic-sized pool in the backyard, and an electronic gate that took 15 full seconds to open. He owned one of the biggest construction companies in the state, had businesses spread across 5 different cities, drove imported cars most people only saw in movies, and wore watches that cost more than a house. But there was one thing all that money could never buy back. Exactly 2 years and 3 months earlier, Richard had lost the only thing that truly mattered: his wife, Lauren. She was just 32 when a runaway truck crossed into the opposite lane on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Lauren had just picked up their son, Theo, from school. He was only 4 years old at the time. By a miracle, the child survived without a single scratch. But Lauren wasn't as lucky. From that horrible day on, Theo was never the same. The little boy who used to run through the house laughing, who woke his parents by jumping on their bed every Saturday morning, who never stopped asking a million questions about everything, simply disappeared. In his place, there was a silent child with empty eyes, always staring at something far away that no one else could see. Theo didn't smile anymore, not even when he got expensive new toys. Not on his 5th birthday, even though Richard filled the house with decorations and hired entertainers. Not when his father tried tickling him, telling jokes, or playing his favorite cartoons. Nothing, absolutely nothing, brought a smile to that small face that seemed to have aged years in a matter of months. Richard was desperate. He spent a fortune on the best child psychologists in the country. 3 sessions a week with highly regarded specialists. Each tried a different approach, each had a theory, but none of them could help Theo improve. The boy was eating less and less. Sometimes he went the whole day without saying a single word, and he had developed a strange habit that terrified Richard. He spent hours locked in his room, drawing frantically with his colored pencils, then ripping every drawing to pieces and throwing them in the trash. Always, without exception. He never kept a single one. Richard tried talking to him. "Son, why do you tear up your drawings? They're so beautiful." But Theo would just shrug and keep going. It was like he was trapped in an endless cycle of creating and destroying, and no one understood why. The house, once full of life and laughter, had become a silent mausoleum. Richard could barely work. At night, he often woke from nightmares and went to Theo's room just to make sure the boy was still there. The person who ran the house was Mrs. Simmons, the housekeeper who'd worked for the family for 15 years. She was 58, a stern woman with a tight expression, always dressed in a spotless uniform, keeping the home running like a Swiss clock. She was dedicated, Richard couldn't deny that. But something about her bothered him. Maybe it was the way she looked at everything with a sense of ownership, as if the mansion belonged to her. Or maybe it was the coldness with which she treated Theo after Lauren's death. "Kids need a firm hand, not coddling," she often said. And there was resentment in her tone, as though she disapproved of Richard spending so much money on therapy, as if she believed it was a waste of time. It was Mrs. Simmons who decided to hire an extra maid. The house was too big and she was overwhelmed. She placed a discreet ad, interviewed 4 candidates, and chose Mary. Mary was 38, though she looked older. She was too thin, her skin worn from years of outdoor work in previous jobs, her hair always tied in a simple bun, her hands rough from endless cleaning. She lived alone in a modest neighborhood, an hour and a half away by bus from the Allens mansion, in a tiny studio apartment barely big enough for a bed and a small stove. During the interview, Mrs. Simmons got straight to the point. "Do you have experience with heavy cleaning?" Mary nodded. "References." She handed over 3 recommendation letters from former employers. "You start Monday, 6 a.m. Salary is 1,200 reis, 2 days off a month. No benefits. Deal?" Mary swallowed hard. That amount barely covered her rent and bills, but she needed the job. "It's fine, ma'am. What Mrs. Simmons didn't ask, and what Mary didn't say, was the reason behind those sad eyes. Mary was also a widow. Her husband, John, had died 4 years earlier from a sudden heart attack at just 35. And exactly 1 year after losing her husband, Mary lost something even worse. Her only son, little Peter. Peter was only 7 when he was diagnosed with leukemia. Mary sold everything she owned, worked 3 different jobs, took out loans she was still paying, but it wasn't enough. The treatment was expensive, the medication cost a fortune, and the public hospital wait list was endless. Peter fought for 8 months, until one Sunday morning he simply didn't wake up. Mary never fully recovered. She had no family left, no one at all. She worked just to survive, to pay off the debts she had taken on trying to save her son, to keep a roof over her head. She had no plans, no dreams, no future. She simply existed. On her first Monday, Mary arrived 5 minutes before 6. Mrs. Simmons opened the kitchen door, looked her up and down like inspecting merchandise, and began listing the day's tasks. Mary nodded and got to work. She was fast and efficient, never wasting time, never complaining. In the first few days, she barely saw Richard or Theo. The father left early and came back late. The boy stayed locked in his room or was taken to his endless therapy appointments. Mary just cleaned, quiet and invisible, like most maids the world chooses not to notice. But on Friday of that first week, something different happened. Mrs. Simmons had to step out to deal with a problem with a food supplier and asked Mary to clean Theo's room while he was at a session with his psychologist. Mary climbed the marble staircase and entered the boys' room. It was huge for a 6-year-old. A race car-shaped bed, a shelf full of toys that looked untouched, a kid's computer, a flat-screen TV on the wall, and a corner with a small desk covered in colored pencils, markers, and paper. Mary started making the bed, gathering dirty clothes, wiping down surfaces carefully. That's when she noticed the trash bin beside the drawing table. It was overflowing with torn paper. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of tiny pieces of colored paper. She knew she shouldn't touch them, but something inside her stirred. Carefully, Mary picked up a few pieces and tried to piece them together like an impossibly difficult puzzle. After nearly 10 minutes, she managed to put together 3 drawings on the floor. All 3 were almost identical. A woman with long hair, a blue dress, and wings. Huge wings like an angel's. And in every drawing, the figure was torn right down the middle. Mary felt her chest tighten. She knew that pain. She knew what it meant to destroy something you loved because it hurt too much to keep it whole. She had done the exact same thing with Peter's photos in the first months after he died. At that moment, she heard the door open. Mary turned quickly and saw Theo standing in the doorway, staring at her with those large, hollow eyes. Mrs. Simmons stood right behind him, arms crossed, wearing a scowl. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped, as if Mary had touched something forbidden. Mary rose quickly, her heart pounding. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just... The trash was so full. I tried to empty it and some papers fell on the floor." Theo said nothing. He walked past her without looking, sat at his little desk, and picked up a colored pencil, as if nothing had happened. Mrs. Simmons huffed impatiently. "Finish up and get downstairs. You have more work." Then she slammed the door. Mary finished cleaning in complete silence. But before leaving the room, she couldn't help herself. She slowly approached the desk where Theo was already drawing the same winged woman, and asked softly, gently, "May I see it?" Theo didn't answer, but he didn't say no either. Mary took that silence as a shy yes. She knelt beside him, keeping a respectful distance, and looked at the drawing. It was the same as the others. The woman in the blue dress, long hair, enormous majestic wings. And then she noticed a detail she hadn't seen in the torn papers. Written in shaky, childlike handwriting in the corner of the page were the words, "Mommy, she's very beautiful," Mary said softly, her voice coming from somewhere deep inside her chest. "Your mom must have been someone very special. Really, really special." Theo stopped drawing. His small hands hovered in the air, trembling slightly. He didn't look at Mary, but she saw a single tear roll slowly down his cheek, leaving a shiny trail on his skin. Mary felt her own heart break into pieces. She knew that pain so well, so intimately, it felt like looking into a mirror. Without thinking too much, letting the words flow naturally from her own grief, she went on speaking, more to herself than to the boy. You know why you tear up the drawings, don't you? It's because you're scared. You're scared that if you draw her whole, complete and happy, she'll go away for good. But if you keep her in pieces, then she still needs you to put her back together. She can't leave you if she's broken. That's why you do it. Theo slowly put the crayon down. He turned his head in a stiff, hesitant motion and looked straight at Mary for the first time. His gaze was intense, shaken, his eyes red from crying. As if she had read his mind, as if she had spoken out loud the deepest secret buried in his soul. Something he couldn't explain to anyone. And then, very slowly, he nodded. A tiny movement, almost invisible, but undeniably real. Mary felt her eyes fill with warm tears. She gently placed her hand on the top of his head, touching his hair with care. I understand. I understand you completely. And before she could control herself, the words came out almost involuntarily, straight from her heart. I lost someone very special too. My little boy, Pedro. He was 7. And I tore up all his pictures because it hurt too much to look at that beautiful little face and know he wasn't here anymore. It hurt too much. But you know what I learned later? That he didn't really leave. He just changed places. He left here. She touched her forehead. And moved here. She placed her hand over her heart, her voice trembling. Theo kept looking at her with watery eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, there was something different in his expression. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was connection. It was the powerful recognition of finding someone who understood him, someone who truly understood his pain, someone who knew that deep, empty hole inside the chest that never fully closes. The next day, when Mary arrived for work, Mrs. Simmons was in a terrible mood. The boy is impossible today. He wouldn't eat breakfast, wouldn't change his clothes. Mr. Richard had to cancel an important meeting to stay with him. And you? Finish the kitchen and go clean his room. Mary walked upstairs with a heavy heart, sensing that something important had shifted. When she opened the door to Theo's room, he was sitting on the floor surrounded by torn-up drawings, his face buried in his knees, crying softly. She walked in slowly, closed the door without a sound, and sat on the floor beside him, keeping a respectful distance. She didn't say anything, absolutely nothing. She just stayed there, present. After 5 long, heavy minutes of silence, Theo lifted his face and looked at her. His eyes were swollen and red from crying, but again, there was something different in them now, a fragile hope. Everybody leaves, he said in a tiny, broken voice, barely a whisper. Mommy left. Now you're gonna leave too. Mary felt a giant knot in her throat, but she didn't run from his truth. I'm not leaving, Theo. I work here now. I'll be here every day. You'll see me. But he shook his head desperately. But one day you'll go away. Everybody goes. Everybody leaves me alone. Mary took a deep breath. She wouldn't lie to that child. It's true, Theo. One day everybody goes away. I will too. Your dad will. You will. That's how life works. Nobody stays here forever. But you know what's really amazing? That while we're here, while we're alive and breathing, we get to be together. We get to understand each other. We get to take care of each other. And that matters. It matters more than you can imagine right now. Theo thought about that for a long moment, processing every word. Then he reached for a blank sheet of paper and began drawing. Mary stayed there, silent, simply present, simply breathing with him. And for the first time since Laura's death, Theo drew the woman with wings whole. Complete. Not torn. Not ripped in half. Every detail fully intact. When he finished, he showed Mary the drawing with a weak but steady voice. Mommy happy, he said, pointing at the smile he had carefully drawn on the woman's face. Mommy happy in heaven. Mary smiled through tears rolling down her face. Yes, she is. Absolutely. And you know why? Because she sees you being strong. She sees you being brave. She's proud of you, Theo. So proud. From that day on, something changed deeply in the Blake mansion. Mary began spending quality time with Theo every day. She didn't force anything. She didn't give psychological advice. She wasn't a therapist. She didn't try to fix him. She just stayed. Sometimes sitting on the floor while he drew. Sometimes helping him organize crayons by color. Sometimes telling silly stories about something she saw on her way to work, or about Pedro and the things he loved. And Theo began responding in a real way. Not with many words, not yet, but with small gestures that meant everything. He started showing her his drawings before deciding whether or not to tear them up. And more often, he chose not to. He chose to keep them. Richard noticed the change in his son. Of course he did. Every father notices. He saw Theo eating a little more at breakfast. He heard him laughing. Tiny smiles at first, almost invisible, but real. He saw him waiting eagerly for Mary every day, running to show her a new drawing, calling for her even if they had just seen each other minutes before. A week and a half later, something extraordinary happened. Theo drew a woman whole and complete, with wide, majestic wings and a huge, genuine smile on her face. And underneath he wrote carefully, "Mommy happy in heaven. Mommy loves me." He didn't tear it. He didn't destroy it. He held the drawing with care, ran down the stairs, something he hadn't done in almost 2 years, and handed it to his father in the office. Richard took the drawing with trembling hands, nearly losing his balance from the emotion. He looked at that complete, peaceful, radiant figure, and broke down in tears like he hadn't in years. He hugged his son so tightly that Theo almost lost his breath. But he didn't complain. He hugged his father back and said, with a wisdom far beyond his age, "Don't cry, Dad. Miss Mary said Mommy is happy now. She's not hurt anymore. She's okay." Richard looked at his son through tears that wouldn't stop falling. "Miss Mary told you that?" Theo nodded firmly. "She lost someone too, Dad. Pedro. He was her little boy. He was 7 when he died. She understands. She understands how we feel." And in that moment, the truth hit Richard like lightning. He finally understood why that simple woman, the humble housekeeper he had met just days earlier, had achieved what a dozen expensive therapists couldn't in 2 years, because she wasn't trying to fix Theo, analyze him, or teach him anything. She was simply understanding him. Truly, deeply, sincerely understanding him. And sometimes, just sometimes, being understood is all a person really needs. Richard called Mary into his office that same day. She walked in nervous, wiping her hands on her apron, her heart racing, afraid she'd done something wrong. "Please sit down, Mary," he said gently, pointing to the chair across from him. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for my son," Richard began, his voice thick with emotion. "I've spent a fortune on the best specialists in the country, brought renowned therapists to the house, and you reached him in just a week and a half. You made him smile again." Mary shook her head, uncomfortable with the praise. "I didn't do anything special, Mr. Blake. I understand what he's feeling. I've been through the exact same thing." Richard nodded slowly. "I know. Theo told me about your son. I'm so sorry, Mary. Truly." Mary swallowed hard, fighting back tears but holding herself together. "Thank you, sir. I want to offer you something important," Richard continued, his voice turning more solemn. "I want to raise your salary, significantly, much more than what you're earning now. And I want you to have a dedicated time every day just to be with Theo. Not as a housekeeper cleaning floors and windows, but as someone helping him through his pain. As someone who understands. Would that be okay? Would you accept that?" Mary was completely speechless. More money meant she could finally pay off her debts much faster. It meant she wouldn't have to squeeze into overcrowded buses at 5 in the morning. It meant she could finally breathe. But more than anything material, it meant she could stay close to Theo. And in a strange, unexpected way, being there for that little boy was healing a part of her she thought would never recover. She wasn't trying to replace Peter, never, but she was allowing her heart, hardened and sealed by grief, to feel affection for a child again. I accept, Mr. Richard. Thank you. Thank you so much. Richard smiled. A real smile. The first genuine one Mary had seen on him since she started working there a few days earlier. Thank you, Mary. You're not just a housekeeper. You're saving my son. You're bringing him back to us. But not everyone in the house was happy with this new dynamic. Mrs. Simmons was absolutely furious. She, who had dedicated 15 full years to that family, who had cared for that house as if it were her own, who had been there when Laura died and had organized the entire funeral with her own hands, was now being overshadowed and ignored because of some newcomer. A simple cleaning lady who had only been there a week and a half. Her jealousy turned into a growing, burning anger. This isn't right, she muttered to the other maids in the kitchen when she thought no one was listening. She's manipulating the boy. Manipulating Mr. Richard. Don't you see? She wants something. Poor people always want something. She's after something. The other maids exchanged uncomfortable glances but stayed silent. They had seen Mary with Theo. They knew the truth. It didn't look like manipulation. It looked like genuine affection. It looked like real love. But Mrs. Simmons refused to accept reality. Envy ate away at her like poison. And then, one night, alone in her room, she made a plan. A calculated, cruel plan. The weeks passed, and Theo kept improving in extraordinary ways. He went back to playing with toys he hadn't touched since his mother died. He started talking more at school, interacting with other kids. His teachers called Richard, amazed by his transformation. Even the psychologist mentioned during a session that something profound and meaningful had happened. Richard only smiled. The right person arrived at the right time. And then, exactly 20 days after Mary started working there, the tragedy happened, the one that nearly destroyed everything. Richard woke up early on a Saturday morning and went to his room to get some important documents he kept in the built-in wall safe. He had a crucial meeting on Monday and needed to review some papers over the weekend. When he opened the safe using the password only he knew, a combination not even the head housekeeper had access to, his heart nearly stopped. Laura's jewelry was gone. All of it. 3 pieces Laura had cherished more than anything. Pieces Richard had saved carefully to give to Theo when he became an adult. Keepsakes of his mother. A diamond necklace that had belonged to Laura's grandmother, worth around $40,000. A diamond ring Richard gave her on their 10th wedding anniversary. And a pair of emerald earrings Laura wore on their wedding day. Together, nearly $60,000 in rare, priceless jewelry. And they had disappeared from a locked safe. Richard felt the floor vanish beneath him. Those pieces were almost all he had left of Laura besides the photographs. Jewelry she had worn, touched, loved, and now it had been stolen. He stumbled out of the room as if in a nightmare and called for Mrs. Simmons. His voice shaking with fury and despair. "Mrs. Simmons, Laura's jewelry is gone," he said. His voice almost unrecognizable, thick with emotion. "They were locked away and now they're gone." Mrs. Simmons widened her eyes, pretending to be shocked. "What do you mean gone? Maybe you didn't close the safe properly?" Richard shook his head, distressed. "No, it was locked. Someone opened it. Someone accessed that safe." Mrs. Simmons' expression changed instantly. It turned cold, calculating, predatory. And then she said, in a dangerously calm voice, "Sir, there's only one new person in this house. Someone who has access to your room when she cleans. Someone who showed up suddenly with no past and no references we could verify. Someone desperate for money, always talking about debts and hardship. Mary." Richard felt as if he'd taken a brutal punch to the stomach. "No, Mary would never do that. That's not who she is." But Mrs. Simmons, with 15 years of experience in manipulating situations inside that house, knew exactly how to plant doubt. "Sir, with all due respect, you've known her only 3 weeks. Yes, she helped Theo, and that's wonderful, but that doesn't prove she's honest. Poor people see $60,000 in jewelry and, well, temptation can be too strong. Her debts are high, sir. Maybe she couldn't resist the opportunity." Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of doubt crushing him. He didn't want to believe it, but he needed to protect Theo. What if Mary had done it? What if she'd been manipulating them this whole time? Call the police, he finally said, feeling as if he were betraying someone who had saved his child. The police arrived within an hour. 2 detectives, one older and experienced, the other younger, began questioning everyone in the house, taking notes. Mary was cleaning the living room when she was called in. She stepped into the library, saw Richard sitting with his head in his hands, refusing to look at her, and her heart sank. Something terrible had happened. Mary, the older detective began with a cold, professional tone. We need to ask you a few questions. Very expensive jewelry disappeared from this house last night. Jewelry worth a lot of money. Do you have access to Mr. Richard's bedroom? Mary turned pale, as if she had seen a ghost. Yes, I do. I clean there twice a week. But I never touched anything. I swear to God. I swear. The detective nodded. Did you know there was a safe in the room? Mary hesitated just for a second. A fatal second. At that exact moment, Mrs. Simmons, who stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, smiled to herself. A small, cruel, triumphant smile no one else saw. I did see the safe while cleaning, Mary admitted, voice trembling. But I never got close to it, never tried to open it. I swear. We're going to need to search your home, the detective said firmly. Standard procedure. Tears welled up instantly in Mary's eyes. I didn't steal anything. Please, you have to believe me. Please. She looked to Richard, begging silently, but he still couldn't bring himself to look at her. That broke her heart into pieces. The only place where she had found hope, the only place where she felt accepted, was crumbling before her eyes. They went to the tiny studio apartment where Mary lived. The officers searched everything with cold precision. Drawers, closets, the bathroom, under the bed, every box, every corner. Nothing. No jewelry. No evidence. Just the humble, simple life of a poor woman trying to survive. They returned to the mansion with the results. We didn't find anything, the detective told Richard. A flood of relief washed over him. Then she didn't do it. I knew it. I knew Mary wasn't guilty. But Mrs. Simmons wasn't done. She had planned everything. Hours later, she walked into the library holding a phone. Detective, she said, dripping with fake remorse. I found this on Mr. Richard's bedroom floor this morning when I made the bed. It's Mary's phone. She must have dropped it while she was checking the safe. She handed the phone over. The detective studied the screen. And there it was, clear as day. A photo of the open safe, the missing jewelry shining inside, taken 3 days earlier at 2 p.m. Exactly when Mary was cleaning that room. The detective turned to her with a stare sharp enough to cut glass. Care to explain this? Mary grabbed the phone with her hands shaking uncontrollably. I never took this picture. This makes no sense. Someone must have taken my phone and used it to set me up. It must have been. She looked around, her eyes meeting the officers' faces, but all she saw was disbelief. Someone framed me. Please, you have to believe me. But even to her own ears, it sounded like a desperate, impossible excuse. The words came out weak, without conviction. Mrs. Simmons shook her head with a fake expression of sadness and forced sympathy, as if she were disappointed by Mary's supposed moral failure. Mary, why would you do this? Why betray Dr. Richard's trust? He gave you such a special opportunity. I didn't do anything, Mary screamed. A scream of pure, absolute despair that echoed through the entire mansion. A cry ripped straight from her soul. Up in his bedroom, Theo heard her voice and recognized it instantly. He ran out of his room and rushed down the stairs. He stopped at the top and saw Mary crying, the officers surrounding her with stern expressions, and his father standing off to the side, face darkened with disappointment. What's going on? Theo asked, his trembling little voice breaking hearts. Aunt Mary, why are you crying? Why is the police here? Mary looked at the little boy, the only person she had learned to love again, and through her desperate tears, she tried to give him a comforting smile. It's okay, Theo. Everything's okay. It's just a misunderstanding. It'll be fixed soon. But nothing was okay. Absolutely nothing. The detective turned to Mary, his voice dropping like a death sentence. Mary Silva, you are under arrest on suspicion of aggravated theft. You have the right to remain silent. No! Theo shouted with a strength no one expected from such a shy little boy. He flew down the stairs, his small feet pounding on the marble. Richard quickly grabbed him. Theo! Stop! Stop now! But Theo fought with a desperate force. Let her go! Let her go! Aunt Mary didn't steal anything. She would never steal. She knows what it's like to lose things. She'd never make someone else lose theirs. Never. You're wrong. You're all wrong. He was crying uncontrollably, sobbing, shouting. It was the first time in almost 2 years he had shown so much raw emotion. But it wasn't healing. It was pain. It was his world collapsing all over again. Mary was being taken away, handcuffed, and the sound of those cuffs snapping shut felt like a gunshot to everyone's heart. She looked back one last time as they led her outside. She saw Theo being held by his father, screaming for her, reaching out as if he hoped she could still grab his hands. And she saw Mrs. Simmons standing quietly in the corner, with a nearly invisible smile on her lips, a smile of satisfaction and revenge. In that moment, Mary understood everything. It was her. Mrs. Simmons had set her up. But who would believe it? A poor cleaning lady accusing the family's trusted house manager of 15 years? No one. Absolutely no one would take her word over that. Mary was taken to the police station, booked like a criminal, photographed like a criminal, and placed in a cell with 3 other women. She sat in the cold corner, wrapped her arms around her knees, and cried harder than she had since the day Peter died. She wasn't crying because of the arrest. She wasn't crying because of the false accusation. She was crying for Theo. She had seen the terror in his eyes. She had seen him falling apart again. And she could do absolutely nothing. The news spread through the entire town almost instantly. A local reporter, always hungry for sensational stories, got a hold of it and posted it online with a clickbait headline. It went viral within hours. In minutes, there were thousands of shares across every app. The comments were cruel and judgmental. Same story as always. That's why you don't trust strangers. She pretended to care about the kid just to get close to the jewelry. Poor people have no character. What a manipulative woman. Back at the mansion, Theo had a complete breakdown. He refused to eat, refused to leave his room, started tearing his drawings again, violently, desperately, as if he were ripping apart his own heart. In just 3 days, he lost everything he had gained in the past 3 weeks. Richard was frantic. He called the psychologist for an emergency home session, but Theo refused to speak to her. "Where's Aunt Mary?" was all he said over and over. "You took her away just like you took Mommy. Everyone leaves. Nobody stays. Nobody loves me. You let her go. You didn't believe her." His son's words cut Richard like knives. On the 3rd night, Richard woke up to Theo screaming. He ran to the bathroom and found his son trying to harm himself with a pair of rounded school scissors. Theo was desperate, trying to cut himself, and Richard felt the world collapse around him. He held the boy, grabbed his small trembling hands, and cried with him. "I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. I should have believed her. I should have trusted her." In that moment, a lightning bolt of clarity struck him. Theo wasn't attached to Mary because she manipulated him. He was attached to her because she was the only person in the entire world who truly understood his pain. Removing Mary from Theo's life was like ripping away the only rope pulling him out of an abyss. Richard called the detectives back. "I want to hire private investigators. The best in the country. I don't care about the cost. I want every security camera in this house reviewed for the past month. I want to know exactly what happened to that jewelry." The detective frowned. "Mr. Almeida, we already have a suspect. We have photographic evidence." Richard stared at him with eyes swollen from crying, but filled with iron determination. "My son tried to hurt himself because someone took away the only person who could help him. If Mary is truly guilty, then prove it with absolute certainty. But if she isn't, then someone set her up. And I need to know the truth." The real truth. The private investigators began the next day. 3 men specializing in corporate crimes and domestic fraud. They reviewed every second of every recording, the entrance, the hallways, the living room, the kitchen, the stairs. Cameras everywhere. It took 2 days and 2 nights of meticulous work. Then they found something. A recording from 6 days before the supposed theft. At 11 at night. Mrs. Simmons sneaking into Richard's bedroom, carrying something small, about the size of a jewelry box. The camera didn't show what it was, but it clearly showed her entering with it, and leaving 15 minutes later empty-handed. The investigators showed it to Richard. "It's circumstantial," one of them said professionally. "But it's extremely suspicious. Why would she enter your room at 11 at night? And why leave empty-handed?" Richard felt anger rising inside him like a beast awakening. Investigate her. Bank accounts, money transfers, payment history, everything. They nodded and began digging. They found she had secret debts, heavy debts. She had been visiting an illegal casino downtown for over a year. She had lost almost all her savings in desperate bets. She owed nearly 180,000 reis and was being physically threatened by loan sharks. She was desperate, almost beyond repair. And there was more. Street cameras caught her entering a reputable pawn shop 4 days before the theft. The investigators went there with a police warrant. The owner, a nervous middle-aged man, denied everything at first. But once he saw the official document, he cracked. The jewelry was there. All of it. The necklace, the ring, the earrings, all intact. He admitted he bought them from an older woman in a spotless uniform. He had a photo of the transaction in his system. It was Mrs. Simmons. She received 155,000 reis, less than half the jewelry's true value, because she was desperate. Richard couldn't believe the depth of the betrayal. 15 years. 15 years of trust, loyalty, or so he thought. And she hadn't only stolen the last jewelry left by Laura, the pieces he had planned to give their son when he grew up. She had destroyed an innocent woman in the process. She had destroyed Mary. She had destroyed Theo. She had nearly destroyed his entire family. Richard went to the police station himself that same afternoon. Mary was in a cell, sitting on the cold cement floor, praying under her breath, praying for Theo, praying for strength. When she saw Richard walk through the station doors, her heart raced. She lowered her head, bracing herself for more accusations, expecting confirmation of her guilt. But what he said came out soft, heavy with genuine remorse. "I'm sorry, Mary. Please, forgive me." Mary lifted her head slowly, confused, her face swollen from crying. "What?" Tears streamed down Richard's cheeks. "You're innocent. It was Mrs. Simmons. She stole the jewelry. She planted the photo on your phone. We found the evidence. Everything. The jewelry was at a pawn shop. She confessed to it all." Mary froze in absolute shock for a few seconds. Her whole body began to tremble, and then she broke down crying. It wasn't a simple cry of relief. It was pain, humiliation, everything she had endured over the last few days crashing down all at once. "I told you it wasn't me," she sobbed uncontrollably. "I told you, and no one believed me. You made me look like a criminal." Richard gripped the bars of the cell, his shoulders shaking. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for not believing you from the beginning. You saved my son, Mary, and I let you be destroyed. I let you be humiliated. I let you be thrown into a jail cell. I'm sorry. I know sorry isn't enough, but I truly am." Mary was released that same afternoon. The charges were immediately wiped from her record. Mrs. Simmons was arrested on the spot, confessed to the entire crime, and was formally charged with evidence tampering and misconduct. The media that had torn Mary apart so quickly now reported the truth. But to her, none of that mattered anymore. She didn't care one bit about what people thought or said. She only cared about one thing. How is Theo? Is he okay? Does he hate me? Richard lowered his head, the memory of his son trying to hurt himself still painfully fresh. He's not okay. Not at all. He's completely regressed. He won't eat, he won't talk, he started hurting himself again. The doctors had to sedate him last night just so he could rest. He keeps calling for you. He thinks you betrayed him. He thinks everyone he loves gets taken away. Mary felt her heart literally split open. I need to see him. Please, Dr. Richard. Let me see him. Now. Richard nodded immediately. You don't need my permission, Mary. You're part of this family now. You always were. They returned to the mansion that same day. Mary was trembling the entire drive, her stomach twisting with nerves. She climbed the stairs slowly, as if moving in slow motion, and stopped at Theo's bedroom door. The boy was lying on his bed, facing the wall, staring blankly at the white surface as if nothing else in the world existed. Mary knocked softly. Theo? He turned his head slowly, as though moving through thick mud, as if he couldn't believe the voice he was hearing. When he saw Mary standing at the door, his eyes widened like saucers. For a whole second he didn't move, frozen, as if he thought he was dreaming, as if she were a hallucination created by his desperate mind. And then he screamed with all the strength he had. Aunt Mary! He ran toward her at full speed, crashing into her waist with such force that they almost fell to the floor. Theo clung to her as if she would disappear again if he loosened his grip even a fraction. He sobbed uncontrollably, his whole body trembling. I knew it. I knew you didn't steal. I knew you'd come back, that you wouldn't leave like Mommy. I believed in you. I knew it. Mary hugged the little boy with every ounce of strength she had, her heart bursting with emotion as she cried with him. I'm not going anywhere, Theo. Promise. I swear on everything sacred, I will never leave you. Never. And for the first time in almost 2 years, the first time since Laura's death, Theo laughed. Not a small laugh, not a forced smile. A deep, genuine laugh, full of pure joy and absolute relief. The sound echoed through the room, down the hallway, filling the entire house. Richard, standing in the doorway watching everything, had to hold on to the doorframe because his legs felt too weak to support him. His son was laughing again. For real, laughing like a child should. In the following days, Richard made Mary an offer. He offered her the official position of head housekeeper, with triple the salary, full benefits, regular time off, complete health coverage. But Mary shook her head gently. Thank you, Dr. Richard, but I don't want to be the head housekeeper. I don't want to stop cleaning Theo's room. I don't want to stop sitting on the floor while he draws and talks to me. I just want to keep being the person who's there for him, if you'll allow it. Richard was speechless for a moment. She didn't want a promotion. She didn't want status or power. She only wanted to stay close to the boy who, in a strange and beautifully inexplicable way, was healing her wounds while she healed his. Then I have a different proposal, Richard finally said. Move in here, into the guest room on the first floor. Not as an employee, but as a real part of this family. Be close to Theo whenever he needs you. Anytime, day or night. You'll have your own life, your own private space, your personal things, but you'll be here, near him, and near us. What do you think? Mary was stunned. Dr. Richard, that's too generous. It's not generosity, he cut in firmly. It's genuine gratitude, an absolute necessity. Theo needs you. I need you. This entire house needs you. Please, Mary. Say yes. Come live with us. Mary accepted. A week later, she moved in with her few belongings. A small suitcase of clothes, some photos of Peter, and an old rosary that once belonged to her mother, into a guest room that was literally bigger than her entire old studio apartment. She still cleaned parts of the house for a few hours a day because she liked it, it gave her purpose and meaning, but her main focus was being there for Theo. And for Richard too, who, over the months, realized he desperately needed someone to talk to. Someone who deeply understood what it meant to lose someone you love. They never became romantically involved. This wasn't that kind of story, but they became a family. Unexpected, organic, and entirely genuine. Richard was the father. Theo was the son. And Mary was the maternal presence who arrived when they least expected it. Not to replace Laura, never to replace someone so special, but to bring back light, hope, and warmth to a house that had been frozen in grief for far too long. Months passed, each one marked by small victories. Theo became a happy child again. Not exactly the same as before. Losing his mother had changed him forever, but he learned to live with the pain without letting it consume him. And much of that was thanks to Mary, who showed him every single day, through example, that it was possible to move forward even when it felt impossible. 1 year after that fateful day, Theo made a special drawing. He worked on it for weeks, secretly, perfecting every detail, every line, every color. Then, on a sunny Sunday morning, he woke up early, went to the living room where Mary and Richard were quietly having coffee, and handed them the paper with reverence. It was a large, colorful, incredibly detailed drawing. It showed 5 people. 3 were on the ground, holding hands, smiling warmly. In the center was Theo, to his left Richard with a peaceful expression, and to his right Mary with a comforting smile. And above them, floating in clouds of soft blue and warm pink, among bright golden stars, were 2 figures with large majestic wings. One was a woman in a blue dress with long hair, Laura. The other was a small boy in a red t-shirt, holding her hand, Peter. Below the drawing, written in the careful handwriting of a 7-year-old who had finally found peace, were the words, "My family, the ones here and the ones up there, all together forever." Mary held the drawing with trembling hands, her voice stuck in her throat. She stared at the picture of little Peter, sketched by Theo, a boy who had never met her son, yet had heard so many stories about him that he managed to draw him with such love and accuracy. She looked at Laura, someone she had never met in person, but who was always there, present in all their hearts. And then she looked at the 3 of them who were still alive, hands intertwined at the bottom of the drawing, holding each other up. With her voice breaking, "Mary F." Theo nodded with calm certainty, wearing that beautiful smile that had now become such a constant part of his face. "Yeah, Aunt Mary. Mom and Peter are looking after us from up there, and we're taking care of each other down here. Everything's okay now. Everyone's where they're supposed to be. And no one's leaving anymore, because we've got each other." Richard gently placed his hand on Mary's shoulder, and she rested her hand on top of his. The 3 of them stood there in silence, staring at that drawing, a visual representation of a broken family that had somehow rebuilt itself in a way none of them could have imagined a year earlier. Theo hung the drawing on his bedroom wall, right in front of his bed, in a place of honor. And every night before falling asleep, he looked at it and whispered, "Good night, Mom. Good night, Peter. Sleep well up there. Thanks for watching over us." Mary kept living with them. She never stopped being who she was. Simple, humble, hardworking, always with her hands busy. But now she had a purpose that was renewed every single day. She had a family again. Not the one she had lost, the one no one could ever replace, but a family that needed her just as much as she needed them. Richard, on the other hand, learned a lesson that would change his life forever. Sometimes the most important people in our lives don't arrive with diplomas on their walls or impressive references. Sometimes they show up with calloused hands and a heart that knows deep, genuine pain well enough to recognize the same pain in others. Mrs. Sawyer was sentenced to 3 years in prison for aggravated theft and falsifying evidence. In the first months, she tried repeatedly to contact Richard, begging for forgiveness, sending letters he never answered. Some betrayals are simply too deep to be forgiven, especially when they involve causing extreme suffering to an innocent child. 5 years later, Theo was 12. He was a happy boy, popular at school, with many real friends. He still drew every day, but now his drawings were of superheroes, outer space planets, dinosaurs, dragons, normal, joyful things from a boy who had overcome pain. Mary was 43, with strands of gray beginning to appear at her temples. She now worked as the coordinator of a non-profit organization Richard had created with his own money to help families who had lost loved ones, especially children going through deep grief. The name of the organization? The Laura and Peter Institute, a touching tribute to the 2 angels who had brought that unlikely family together. Richard had regained a genuine smile. He never remarried, but he had found inner peace, real peace. He knew Laura would be proud of the man he had become, of the devoted father he was to Theo, and of the kindness he had learned to recognize in the right people. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, exactly 7 years after the terrible accident that had taken Laura from their lives. The three of them were sitting in the main living room of the mansion when Theo said something that would stay in their hearts forever. "Dad, Aunt Mary, I was thinking, Mom didn't die for nothing, you know? It wasn't random." Richard and Mary looked at him, surprised. Theo continued with that strange, deep wisdom that some children develop after living through tragedy. "If Mom hadn't left that day, I would have never met Aunt Mary, and Peter wouldn't have someone to take care of him up there. I think they found each other because they needed each other. And we found each other because we needed each other too. It wasn't an accident, Dad. That's just how love works. It never ends, it just changes shape. It becomes something different, but it keeps existing." Mary hugged Theo as tears streamed down her face. Richard joined the embrace. And at that moment, in that room that used to be silent and cold, full of despair, there was a warmth no heater in the world could produce. It was the genuine warmth of a family that had been devastated by tragedy but had chosen, together, day after day, to rebuild itself through unconditional love, deep empathy, and the understanding that shared pain, when met with a willing ear and an open heart, miraculously transforms into healing. This story teaches us fundamental lessons about life. Material wealth doesn't heal the soul. Richard had all the money in the world. Houses, businesses, expensive cars. But it was a simple woman with calloused hands who saved his son. Those who know deep pain are the ones who can recognize it in others. Mary wasn't a psychologist, had no tea. Family isn't just blood. It isn't just biology. It's who chooses to stay, who stands by you in the hardest moments, who loves you even when it's complicated, even when leaving would be the easier path. Never judge without knowing the truth. Mary was nearly destroyed by false accusations rooted in social prejudice. It was her appearance, her lack of money, that condemned her in the eyes of everyone first. Healing begins when we find someone who truly understands us. Sometimes all a person needs is to know they aren't alone in their pain, that someone else knows that deep suffering too. If this story touched your heart, think about this. Is there someone around you suffering in silence? Someone fighting a battle you can't see from the outside? Sometimes a simple gesture of empathy, a moment of genuine attention, a sincere, "I understand you," can literally change a life forever. And remember, the most important people in your life may arrive in completely unexpected ways. Don't judge them by appearance or social status. Don't judge them by what they own or how much money they have. Judge them by their ability to love, to truly understand, and to be present when it matters the most. True love isn't measured by money or social status. It's measured by the ability to show up in the hardest moments, to understand without judging, to heal simply by being there. Mary didn't have degrees hanging on the wall, didn't have savings, didn't have anything except a heart that understood pain as well as she knew her own name. And that, just that, was exactly what made her the right person at the right time. Theo didn't need more expensive therapists or fancy treatments. He needed someone who would look at him and sincerely say, "I get it. I've been through this too. It's okay to feel what you're feeling. It's okay to cry. It's okay to be scared. I'm here." Richard learned that protecting his son didn't mean giving him the most beautiful or expensive things in the world. It meant giving him what he truly needed: genuine understanding, constant presence, and the freedom to feel his pain without judgment or pressure. And in the end, all of them, Richard, Theo, and Mary, found healing not despite the pain they endured, but through it, because it was this shared pain, this mutual vulnerability, that united them, that made them understand one another, that turned them into a real family. Thank you so much for watching this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more touching stories like this one. Share this story with someone you love, someone who needs this message of hope and new beginnings. A big hug.